Welcome to Intrinsic Truth, and thank you for joining me today. Today, I would like to discuss an interesting connection between the Seventh-day Adventist Church, namely its prophetess, Ellen G. White, as well as the Roman Catholic Church. Now, if you think this is a strange statement, just wait until we discover a statement from Ellen White, and then we look at its origin and we look at the history of it. So I invite you to join me today as we will read one statement from Ellen White regarding the Passion of Christ, and then we'll discover the origin of it. Now, there are many connections between the SDA Church and the Roman Catholic Church today, but this is not a history of it, nor a survey of all the similarities that exist. However, this one is really quite striking, as this clearly comes from the vision of Ellen G. White. The quote comes from Spiritual Gifts, Volume 1, page 57. Quote, "He was weak and feeble through pain and suffering caused by the scourging and blowing which he had received. Yet they laid on him the heavy cross upon which they were soon to nail him. But Jesus fainted beneath the burden. 3 times they laid on him the heavy cross, and 3 times he fainted." Ellen White describes the Passion of Christ, the Via Dolorosa, as Jesus faints under the cross, or the heaviness of the cross, 3 times. There is no biblical evidence for this. You will not find it in Mark, you will not find it in Luke, you will not find it in Matthew. So the question is, where did Ellen White take it from? Well, most likely, if you're a Seventh-day Adventist, you would say that Ellen White took it from her vision, or some young man or an angel or whoever it was gave her that vision. It may be true. I'm not denying that she would have had a vision like this. However, when we look at the history of these faintings of Jesus or fallings of Jesus, I simply wonder if Ellen White has borrowed it, as she has borrowed so many other things. So I want you to take a look now at the 14 stations of the cross. You will find them pretty much anywhere online. If you look at point 3, point 7, and point 9, clearly says here that Jesus falls. Whether he faints or he falls, it is not quite determined here, but neither it is important, because clearly Jesus is left without strength. Now, this is really quite interesting, because the Roman Catholic Church has developed these 14 stations and solidified them by 1731 under Pope Clement XII. Obviously, the history of the 14 stations is much older than this. We find them all already with the Franciscan order in 1340s, I believe. We find them in Belgium as 14 stations in 1505. And of course, the church accepts this as a tradition to have those 14 stations. The number of stations varied at one point, but the church solidifies them, like I said, at 14 stations with Clement XII by 1731. Now, the Roman Catholic Church may have borrowed this in some way from someone who is called Katherine Emer. Now, she was a German nun of the Augustinian order. She became a mysticist. She became Mary Visionary, which means Mary would be the one to give her visions. And she also was a stigmatist, which means she would receive open wounds on her body. She would gain those wounds. They would open up and they would bleed. Normally, in religious settings, a stigmatist is the one who would have the wounds in the same locations as Christ would have had them at the time of the cross or his beating, like his back, his head, hands and feet, as well as the side. So it is stated in history that Emmerich did have those experiences. She was a stigmatist. According to her, I want to read a short quote. "Here he stumbled and fell for the 6th time. And no sooner did he reach Calvary than he sank down again for the 7th time." It is clear that Jesus faints at least 7 times in Catherine's appraisal of this and Catherine's visions. It is clear that under Roman Catholic Church tradition, he faints 3 times, even though Pope John Paul II changes those 14 stations. Well, he doesn't actually change them. He provides his own version of the 14 stations, which he calls them scriptural. So there is no fainting in his version, which he proposed in 1991. They are practiced by some churches of today. However, the original way of the cross for the Roman Catholic includes the 14 stations, which include the 3 where Jesus falls. I find it quite interesting and innovative on Ellen White's part that she would include something like this in her visions, as well as stated by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. She obviously would have had a vision from God or Jesus. I simply wonder if Ellen White was well aware of the 3 stations of the cross, of the way of the cross. And if she was, and no doubt she would have been, I find it quite surprising that she would want to include this. It is clear to me, at least, that she is borrowing this idea of the 3 faintings of Jesus based on the Roman Catholic tradition. Now, if you are a Seventh-day Adventist, this is really troublesome. Maybe not for all of you, but those of you who are honest with yourself, you will then have to really answer this question. Is it possible that Ellen White has drawn, at least in the vision that she would have had on her own, from this nun or from Pope Clement XII? It is quite striking of the similarities. And I need to propose here that to be honest with this is to understand the history and to understand that Ellen White may have borrowed. And if she has, if you have information like this, it is important for us to discover, it is important for us to study this so that we will not be misled. Thank you again for watching. This is Arthur for Intrinsic Truth. Have a wonderful and blessed day.